A lonely man walks home in the dead of night and hears a sound that changes his life forever. A cry, a baby, abandoned in the rain. What he does next will lead to a story you'll never forget. A story of sacrifice, secrets, and a love stronger than blood. Stay till the end. The truth will break your heart and heal it too. It was nearing midnight. The city was hushed beneath a blanket of soft rain. Streetlights stood like solemn sentinels, their amber glow pooling onto the glistening sidewalks below. The rhythmic tap of droplets against metal, the occasional hiss of tires slicing through puddles, and the distant hum of life settling down for the night were all that remained to disturb the stillness. Robert Hayes walked home alone, as he did every night. A 40-year-old maintenance worker, Robert carried the weariness of the world in his bones. His shoulders slouched slightly, not just from the weight of his tool bag, but from the weight of years. Years filled with loss, loneliness, and routine. His boots splashed gently through the shallow water on the pavement. His jacket already damp from the rain that had started hours earlier and showed no sign of letting up. His life had once held hope, distant now, like a faded photograph tucked in a drawer too long unopened. There had been dreams once, a marriage that ended in silence, a family that never was, friends who drifted away with time. Now, the apartment he returned to each night was as silent as his footsteps. No laughter, no warmth, no one waiting. Just a table with one chair, a refrigerator humming louder than it should, and a television that often played to no audience. But that night, that ordinary, rainy night, fate intervened. A sound pierced through the murmur of the rain. It was faint at first, barely audible, almost like the cry of a cat. Robert paused, his brow furrowing as he tilted his head. Another sound followed, sharper this time, high-pitched and raw. A baby. He turned slowly, heart quickening, eyes scanning the foggy darkness illuminated by dull street lamps. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted something beneath the nearest lamppost. A bundle, unmoving, a shape on the sidewalk that shouldn't have been there. Abandonment. It struck him before he even reached her. There, tucked beneath a threadbare, soaked blanket, was a tiny newborn baby girl. She was crying, not the wail of a child demanding attention, but the broken sobs of a being too cold, too hungry, too scared. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged with blue, her small fists trembling in the chill of the night. Rain had drenched her. She was no more than a few days old. Robert dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he gently lifted the soaked fabric away. For a moment, he simply stared. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a father, had never even held a baby for more than a minute. But instinct took over. He scooped her up delicately, as though afraid she might break in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a feather, a whisper. He could feel her shiver against his chest, could see the fragile rise and fall of her breath. "You're safe now, little one," he whispered hoarsely, brushing rain from her forehead. His voice cracked with emotion, and he didn't know where it came from. He hadn't said those words in years, not to anyone. He cradled her close, wrapping his jacket around her tiny frame, sheltering her from the cold, the rain, the world that had already failed her. For the first time in years, Robert didn't walk home. He ran. Each step splashed through the street puddles, his shoes heavy, his lungs burning, but he didn't care. His mind was racing faster than his feet. He had no crib, no formula, no clue how to care for a newborn. But none of that stopped him. When he reached his apartment, he burst through the door and gently laid the baby on the only towel he had clean. He fumbled with his phone, but paused. Who would he call? The police? Social services? But a voice inside him, deep and fierce, said, "No, not yet." He knocked on his neighbor's door. An older woman named Mrs. Jefferson, who had raised 5 children of her own, and whose apartment always smelled of lavender and warm bread. She took one look at the baby in his arms and gasped. "She needs warmth and milk," she said without hesitation, disappearing and returning with a small bottle of warm formula from her visiting granddaughter. Robert sat on the couch, his jacket soaked, his hands trembling, and fed the baby slowly. Her cries softened, her breathing calmed. She stared up at him with eyes wide and unblinking, storm-gray eyes that seemed to ask, "Why me?" He didn't have an answer. He held her for hours, even after she drifted into sleep. He couldn't put her down. Not yet. Not tonight. Her body was so small, so fragile, her breath soft as cotton against his chest. There was a vulnerability to her that cut through him like a blade, and something else too, something that stirred deep within. When dawn peeked over the city, Robert was still awake, seated by the window, rocking gently. And he had already made his decision. This little girl, whom he had found by chance, by fate, she would not go back to the system that had failed her. He didn't have much, but he had enough. Enough to give her warmth, a roof, a voice to sing lullabies, 2 arms to carry her, a heart that somehow, in the space of one night, now beat for her. He looked at her sleeping face, framed in the oversized sweater he'd wrapped her in. One of his oldest, softest ones. She looked peaceful now, safe. And then he smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "I'll call you Lily," he said softly, "like a flower, a bloom in this broken world." The name felt right, delicate, beautiful, resilient. He spent the next few days navigating a whirlwind of uncertainty. He contacted child services not to give her away, but to begin the process of fostering, with the ultimate hope of adoption. He sat through interviews, inspections, paperwork. People asked questions, raised eyebrows. "You're a single man," they said. "You have no parenting experience." Robert only had one reply: "I may not be perfect, but I'll love her better than anyone else ever could." And he meant it. He took time off work to stay home with her, read books on infant care, watched videos, called Mrs. Jefferson 10 times a day. Slowly, the apartment transformed. A second-hand crib, a mobile of stars, tiny clothes folded in a drawer, baby wipes, diapers, and a growing stock of lullabies that he hummed every night. He talked to her constantly, about the world, the sky, the rain, and even about her name. "You're Lily now," he'd whisper. "You don't belong to the streets. You belong here, with me." And though she couldn't speak, her coos and sleepy smiles felt like answers. Weeks passed, then months. Every moment with her changed him. The loneliness in his apartment gave way to giggles, the echo of tiny feet, the hum of a new kind of life. The emptiness was gone. In its place bloomed love, purpose, joy. Robert no longer came home in silence. He came home to a voice calling out, to arms reaching up, to a heart that now beat outside his chest. And it all began that rainy night, when a man who had no reason left to hope found hope crying beneath a streetlight. Robert never imagined that his life would take such a turn. Just a few months ago, his world had been painted in shades of gray, monotonous, quiet, and lonely. But now, everything had color. Everything had changed, and all because of a baby girl named Lily. When he had first found her, fragile and crying in the rain, something inside him had shifted. He had gone from a solitary maintenance worker, living paycheck to a man with a mission. A man with someone to protect, nurture, and love. He hadn't signed up for fatherhood. It had landed in his lap unexpectedly, without warning, without instruction. But he embraced it with a devotion that surprised even himself. He never expected how hard it would be. The early days were a blur of diapers, sleepless nights, bottle warmings, doctor appointments, and endless crying, both Lily's and sometimes, silently, his own. He would wake up at 3 a.m., not to an alarm clock, but to Lily's tiny wails echoing through the apartment. And still, he never complained. He would stumble out of bed, rubbing his eyes, lifting her gently into his arms. "I've got you, sweetheart," he'd whisper each time. He didn't have much: a humble job, a modest home, a frugal lifestyle. But what he lacked in luxury, he made up for in sheer, determined love. To make ends meet, Robert picked up extra shifts at work. He cleaned late at night, fixed broken pipes, changed flickering light bulbs in the buildings he maintained. He never said no to overtime. The money was tight, but he managed. Every dollar counted. For formula, for diapers, for the soft blankets Lily liked to cuddle into. Sometimes he'd come home bone-tired, his hands rough from work, his knees aching from a full day on ladders or crawling under sinks. But as soon as he stepped inside and heard Lily's gurgling laughter or saw her eyes light up at the sight of him, the exhaustion melted away. His apartment slowly turned into a home filled with warmth. Photos of Lily on the wall, a stuffed giraffe in the corner, crayons scattered on the coffee table, finger paintings taped proudly to the fridge. The scent of baby powder and Johnson's shampoo lingered in the air. He was no longer just Robert the maintenance worker, he was Dad. But fatherhood wasn't just about survival, it was about learning. And Robert took it seriously. He taught himself how to change diapers in under a minute, how to warm a bottle to just the right temperature. He Googled parenting tips late at night, borrowed books from the library, and watched online tutorials on how to soothe a teething child. He learned how to read bedtime stories with voices and silly faces, how to give piggyback rides that ended in fits of laughter, how to braid hair, though it took him weeks to get it right. He celebrated every milestone like it was the biggest moment in the world. Lily's first word, Dada, her first steps across the living room floor, her first tooth, her first birthday cake. The neighbors began to notice. Robert lived in a building filled mostly with retirees and young couples. At first, people whispered, curious, even skeptical. "Isn't he single? Where did the baby come from? Why raise a child that isn't yours?" It was Mrs. Green, a retired teacher from the third floor, who had asked him one afternoon while Lily was playing on a blanket at the park. She didn't mean it cruelly. She was genuinely puzzled. Robert looked at her and, without hesitation, replied with quiet conviction, "Because she is mine now, and she saved me more than I saved her." The answer silenced the questions. From then on, the building softened toward him. Mrs. Green offered hand-me-down books. A couple down the hall dropped off gently used clothes. Even grumpy Mr. Olson, who rarely smiled at anyone, left a box of toys outside Robert's door one day with a note, "For Lily." No need to return. The bond between Robert and Lily grew deeper with every passing year. She became the rhythm of his life, her laughter, the music that played in the background of his every action. She was the first person he thought of when he woke up, and the last he saw before going to sleep. Weekends were sacred. They belonged to Lily. While other men spent Saturdays watching football or sleeping in, Robert spent his days finger painting with Lily, building blanket forts, visiting the local zoo, or letting her help him fix things around the apartment with her plastic toy tools. He made pancakes shaped like bears. They always came out lopsided, but Lily thought they were magic. Every night, before bed, he read her a story, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. As she got older, he'd teach her new things: the alphabet, numbers, colors. He used every moment as a chance to teach, not just about letters and shapes, but about kindness, honesty, and empathy. Say please. Say thank you. Always help those who need it. You're not better than anyone, but no one is better than you. He never raised his voice. He never raised his hand. He disciplined with love, corrected with patience, and always made sure she felt safe. Lily, in turn, adored him. She followed him everywhere, her tiny legs running to catch up with his long stride. She would reach up for his hand as they crossed the street, clutch his pants when she was nervous, and fall asleep most nights curled up against his chest. To her, Robert wasn't just a dad, he was her whole world. He fixed her toys. He kissed her scraped knees. He helped her with homework. He taught her how to ride a bike, holding the seat until she felt brave enough to pedal on her own. When she fell, he picked her up. When she cried, he held her. When she laughed, he laughed with her. She didn't know she was adopted. She didn't know about the night he found her. But it didn't matter. Love was all she knew, and Robert gave it without condition. The years rolled by. Seasons changed. Lily grew taller, smarter, braver, and Robert, though older and more tired, never once stopped being her rock. There were nights when he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the future, wondering if he was doing enough, if Lily would ever feel the absence of a mother, if he was giving her all she needed. But then she would come into his room in her pajamas, crawl beside him, rest her head on his chest, and whisper, "I love you, Daddy." And all his doubts would disappear. He wasn't perfect, but he was enough. He was her dad, not by blood, not by name, but by every action, every sacrifice, every heartbeat. And in that truth, he found peace. Years from that rainy night when his life changed forever, Robert still carried the memory of how it all began. The cry in the dark, the fragile girl in the rain, the choice he made in an instant that would define the rest of his life. And he wouldn't have changed a single thing. Lily had always been bright. Even as a little girl, she possessed a curiosity that sparkled in her eyes and a spirit that danced in her laughter. As she grew older, that spark only deepened, transforming into intellect, compassion, and strength. By the time she turned 19, she had blossomed into a young woman who carried both warmth and wisdom in her smile. She had long, dark hair she often tied up in a ponytail, and her hazel eyes, mirrors of the world's kindness, shone whenever she spoke about the things she loved: books, music, helping others, and her father. Robert had grown older too. Now in his late 50s, the once vigorous man who used to hoist Lily on his shoulders at the park moved slower. His back ached more often, his hair had thinned and turned almost entirely gray. But there was something timeless in the way he looked at Lily, as if seeing her never got old, never dulled, never failed to fill his heart with light. To Lily, Robert wasn't just a parent. He was her anchor, her moral compass, her best friend. She would often say she didn't just grow up with Robert. She grew because of him. College was a big step. She had earned a scholarship to a reputable university in the city, not too far from home, but far enough that Robert's apartment began to feel a little quieter. He didn't say much when she left that first morning, just packed her a lunch, tucked in a little note like he always did, and gave her a tight hug. "Go be amazing," he said, kissing her forehead, "and don't forget to eat." Lily smiled, her eyes glassy with emotion. "I won't. You raised me too well to forget that." Even in college, surrounded by new faces and buzzing opportunities, Lily carried Robert in everything she did. She was known among her professors for her empathy, always the first to volunteer, the first to stay after class to help a fellow student, the one who'd bring an extra sandwich just in case someone forgot their lunch. And when anyone asked her about her upbringing, she never hesitated. "My dad raised me," she'd say simply. "He's the strongest person I know." Her dorm room was filled with things that reminded her of home. Photos of her and Robert at the zoo, drawings from when she was 5, and those little notes he used to put in her lunch boxes. She kept them all, some yellowed with age, some wrinkled, but all precious. You are braver than you think. I'm proud of you, always. Don't let anyone dim your light, Lily. Those messages shaped her. They rooted her with confidence and gave her the freedom to dream. One day, in her creative writing course, the professor assigned an essay. The prompt was simple: write about the person who shaped your life the most. While other students wrote about authors, musicians, or historical figures, Lily didn't even hesitate. She opened her notebook and, without even pausing to think, wrote across the top, "The man who made me." She poured her heart onto the page. The story of how she was raised not by a man bound by blood, but by a man bound by choice. A man who found her when no one else wanted her. A man who sacrificed sleep, money, comfort, and decades of his life so she could feel safe, so she could feel loved. She wrote about his laugh, about the way he learned to braid her hair, even though he had calloused fingers and no clue what he was doing. About the time he stayed up all night building her a cardboard castle for her 7th birthday because they couldn't afford a real one. About the way he cheered the loudest at her school plays, even if he had to miss work to be there. The next week, the professor handed her essay back with a single comment scrawled across the top. "Is this fiction?" Lily circled the question in red ink and wrote beneath it, "Number, it's about my dad, Robert." The professor didn't say anything after that, but a few weeks later, Lily was invited to read her piece aloud at a campus event called Voices of the Heart. She stood under the warm glow of the auditorium lights, clutching the paper in her trembling hands, and read every word aloud. By the end, half the audience was in tears, not because her story was tragic, but because it was full of something rare: quiet, selfless love. Afterward, people approached her. "Your dad sounds amazing. He reminds me of my grandfather. I wish everyone had someone like that." And Lily just smiled and nodded. "He is amazing. He really is." Back at home, Robert continued his quiet life. He still worked part-time, still kept the apartment neat and tidy, still watered the small potted plant Lily gave him when she was 10. A violet that, against all odds, still bloomed every spring. He missed her, of course. Sometimes, when the silence in the apartment grew too loud, he would sit in her old room. Her books still lined the shelf. Her school trophies still sat dusty but proud on the desk. He never changed a thing. He would read old birthday cards she had written him, watch home videos on his little television, or reread the diary he kept from the night he found her. It had become his habit, a way to remind himself of how far they had come. One evening, Robert received a package in the mail. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, and had Lily's handwriting on it. Inside, he found a framed copy of the essay, "The Man Who Made Me," printed neatly on cream-colored parchment. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "Dad, this is the story I read at school. I wanted you to have the first printed copy, because every word is yours. Every line is us. Love you, always. Lily." Robert sat for a long time, just staring at it. His eyes filled with tears, and his weathered fingers traced the title over and over. He didn't need awards. He didn't need money or recognition. This was everything. That night, he hung the framed essay in the living room, right above the couch, where anyone who visited would see it. When Lily came home that weekend, she saw it hanging there and smiled. "You hung it?" Robert chuckled, his voice hoarse. "Of course I did. It's the best thing anyone's ever written about me." "You earned every word," she whispered, hugging him tightly. They spent that weekend the way they always did, cooking pancakes, playing cards, walking through the park. Just the two of them, father and daughter. Lily noticed the way his steps had slowed, the way he rubbed his joints when he thought she wasn't looking. Age had crept up on him quietly, just as she had bloomed into adulthood. But no matter how old he got, Robert would always be her dad. The man who made her feel like she could do anything, be anything. She would carry that love with her for the rest of her life. And even as her world expanded, even as she grew into her own woman, her foundation, her story, would always begin and end with one man. A man who had found a baby in the rain. A man who gave everything without asking for anything. A man who chose to be a father when he didn't have to be. A man named Robert. The rain had returned. It wasn't the wild, stormy kind, just a quiet, steady drizzle that tapped against the windows and blurred the city lights like a watercolor painting. Lily had come home for the weekend. Not for anything in particular, just one of those spontaneous visits that always warmed Robert's heart. He had cooked her favorite meal, tomato basil pasta, and they'd spent the evening laughing at old movies, curled up under a shared blanket on the couch. Now, Robert was asleep in his recliner, gently snoring, a worn book resting on his chest. Lily tiptoed to her old room, now half storage, half shrine to her childhood. The walls were still lined with her faded posters, and her school certificates still hung proudly in mismatched frames. She smiled, running her fingers over the spine of a book she hadn't opened in years. But then something caught her eye. A dusty old cardboard box, shoved in the back of the closet under a blanket. It wasn't labeled, just an ordinary, time-worn box. Something about it tugged at her. She knelt down, pulled it out carefully, and opened it. Inside, wrapped in tissue and years of forgotten time, was a tiny soft blanket, pale pink, worn thin at the edges. She touched it gently. It felt familiar, though she couldn't remember why. Beneath the blanket lay folded documents, yellowed hospital bills, a birth certificate with the name left blank, discharge papers with only the words "abandoned infant" scribbled in the comments. Lily's heart began to race. Her hand shook as she picked up the final item, a brown leather journal, the spine cracked, the pages curled at the corners. On the inside cover, in Robert's familiar handwriting, was her name, Lily. She opened the first page. March 7th, midnight. I found her. I still can't believe it. A baby, just left there in the rain. She was crying, so small, so cold. I wrapped her in my coat and ran home. I didn't think, I just moved. What kind of world leaves a child like that? The words pulled her in like a tide. Each page chronicled her life in vivid detail. Robert had written everything, every fever, every birthday, every first word, every stumble and hug and lullaby. He hadn't missed a moment, but the early pages told stories Lily had never heard. I was terrified. What if someone came for her? What if I wasn't enough? I didn't know the first thing about being a parent, but I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let her be another forgotten child. I named her Lily, because even in the dirt, lilies bloom. Tears blurred her vision as she kept reading. Every sentence was a window into Robert's soul, a man who had quietly carried the weight of love and fear for nearly 2 decades. He had taken a broken stranger's child and made her feel like she was wanted, like she belonged. Lily couldn't breathe. The walls of her world felt like they were shifting, cracking open to reveal a truth she'd never imagined. And yet, the overwhelming feeling wasn't betrayal. It was love. Raw, boundless, honest. She clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face, and quietly stepped out of the room. The living room was dimly lit, the rain outside still whispering against the glass. Robert stirred in his recliner as she approached. He blinked awake, groggy but alert, his eyes immediately going to her face. "Lily, everything okay?" She didn't say a word. She simply knelt beside him, holding the old blanket and journal in her arms, her cheeks wet with emotion. His eyes went wide. He sat up, his lips parting as if to speak. but the words got stuck in his throat. "You found it," he said softly, barely above a whisper. Lily nodded. Her voice trembled. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Robert looked down, ashamed. "I was going to someday, but the years passed and I kept thinking, why bring pain into something beautiful? I didn't want you to feel like you didn't belong." She placed the journal gently on his lap and took his weathered hands into hers. "I've never belonged more," she said. I didn't know how much you gave, how much you carried." "I didn't do it for thanks," he murmured, his voice cracking. "I did it because the moment I saw you, I knew. You were mine, and you've always been mine." A silence passed between them, full of unspoken words, of years stitched together by silent sacrifice and unconditional devotion. "You may not be my blood," Robert began, tears welling in his eyes. "But I've always been your heart," Lily finished for him. He looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, the years seemed to disappear. She wasn't just the little girl he had raised anymore. She was a woman now, one who understood the depth of what he'd done, and still chose to love him for it. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, past and present, bound by a love stronger than any bloodline. Later that night, Robert made them both a cup of tea. They sat in the kitchen, the journal open between them, and went through each page together. Lily laughed at the memories she remembered. She cried at the ones she didn't. There was the note about her first word being "bah," and how Robert spent an entire week trying to figure out what it meant. It turned out to be her version of blanket. There was a scribbled entry about her breaking the neighbor's window with a plastic golf club. And the heartbreaking ones too, like the time she got sick and Robert stayed up for 3 nights straight, sleeping beside her crib just to be sure she kept breathing. Every page was filled with love. "This journal," she whispered, "it's more than a memory. It's a record of everything good in the world." Robert gave a small smile. "I wrote it because I was afraid I'd forget the little things, and I couldn't bear to lose a single moment with you." Lily closed the journal gently and rested her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Dad." He kissed her temple. "I've loved you from the second I saw you, little one." The next day, Lily asked if she could take the journal with her back to school. "Of course," Robert said, his voice warm. "It belongs to you." She paused before leaving, her arms full of books and clothes, and looked back at him. "I want to tell the world about you," she said. "Someday, when the time is right." Robert smiled, that familiar twinkle in his aging eyes. "Then I'll be the proudest man alive." That night, back in her dorm, Lily placed the journal on her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. Not an essay, not a poem, but the beginning of something larger. A book, maybe, a story, one that started on a rainy night under a lamppost and led to a girl who bloomed in the warmth of a stranger's love. The spring air was fresh with the scent of blossoms. Birds chirped along the rooftops as sunlight painted golden streaks across the windows of a building that didn't exist a year ago. A building born from love, memory, and quiet sacrifices. The large blue and white sign above the entrance read, "Robert's Light, a home for abandoned children." Beneath it, a small crowd had gathered, all eyes drawn to the young woman standing in front of the doors with a pair of ceremonial scissors in hand. Lily. She wore a simple white dress, elegant but unpretentious, her long brown hair pulled into a soft braid that rested on her shoulder. Her smile trembled with emotion as she looked out at the gathering. Friends, volunteers, donors, and most importantly, the man seated in the front row. Robert. Now in his early 60s, he looked older than his years. Silver streaking his hair, deep lines etched into his face, but his eyes still gleamed with the same quiet strength that had cradled a crying baby all those years ago. He sat with pride swelling in his chest and a handkerchief clenched tightly in one fist. Watching Lily now felt like watching a sunrise, a new beginning, one that had once seemed impossible. Lily stepped forward, her voice clear but soft as she began to speak. "I want to thank you all for being here today," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd before returning to the man she called Dad. "This isn't just a building, it's a promise that no child will be left behind, that no baby will cry alone in the rain and be forgotten." She paused, emotions threatening to spill over. "I know what it feels like to be unwanted. Even though I was too young to remember it, the truth is, I was abandoned, left on a sidewalk on a cold, rainy night. But that night, someone chose to stop. Someone picked me up and carried me into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love." Her eyes found Robert's, and her voice cracked with the weight of memory. "That man didn't have much. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was just kind and brave. And he gave me everything. Everything I am today, every good part of me, exists because one man made a choice to love a child that wasn't his by blood." She held up the scissors and cut the ribbon. Applause broke out, but Lily wasn't finished. She stepped away from the podium and walked straight to Robert. Everyone fell silent as she knelt in front of him and took his hands in hers. "This place," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks, "exists because of you. It's your legacy, Dad. It's proof that one act of love can change the world." Robert, overwhelmed, blinked rapidly. His voice trembled as he said the only words he could manage. "You were my light before I ever gave you yours." They embraced tightly, and the crowd watched with misty eyes as the moment settled over them like a blessing. The inside of the center was warm and welcoming, painted in soft colors with murals of children laughing, trees blooming, and a path of stars leading up a staircase labeled "Dream Big." Lily gave a tour to the guests, proudly showing off the classrooms, play areas, bedrooms, and quiet reading nooks. Each room was named after something meaningful: hope, courage, wonder. One room near the back was simply called the blanket room, filled with handmade quilts and plush chairs. At the center of the room, inside a glass case, was a faded pink baby blanket. Next to it sat a framed page from Robert's journal. The very first entry: "I found her, a baby, crying in the rain. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to try. Her name is Lily, and she's the reason I'll never give up again." That room became a symbol for every child who would walk through the doors of Robert's light, a space to feel safe, held, and loved. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone and the sun had dipped behind the trees, Lily and Robert stood outside the building in peaceful silence. They watched as lights flickered on in the dorm rooms. A volunteer walked a toddler down the hallway, while another rocked a newborn in her arms. Laughter echoed faintly from the dining area. Robert leaned on his cane, taking it all in with quiet awe. "I never imagined something like this," he murmured. Lily slipped her arm around his. "I did," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Every night you came home tired, every time you gave me your last bite of food, every note you left in my lunchbox. You were planting seeds. I just watered them." He chuckled softly. "You always were the poetic one." She smiled, then turned serious. "I want you to be part of this, more than just a name. I want your stories, your guidance. I want these kids to know the man who saved me." He gave her a long look, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I'd be honored." Weeks passed, and Robert settled into a new rhythm. He became a fixture at Robert's Light, reading stories to the little ones, fixing broken toys, and sneaking extra cookies to kids during snack time. Everyone called him Grandpa Robert, and he wore the title with pride. He even started writing again, this time not in secret journals, but in letters addressed to the children. Each letter carried a message of hope, resilience, and love. Lily began collecting them into a small book titled The Lightkeeper's Letters. One afternoon, a young girl asked him, "Were you really just a janitor before?" Robert smiled and said, "I was a janitor, yes. But the day I picked up Lily, I became so much more." Lily, too, found new purpose. She spent her days managing the center, counseling teens, hosting workshops for new foster parents, and giving speeches about the power of chosen family. Her voice carried more than words. It carried the weight of truth, lived and earned. She received awards, invitations, even media attention. But every time someone asked about her success, she redirected the spotlight. "I just followed the path my dad lit for me." One evening, a year after the center opened, Lily returned to the apartment where it all began. It had been cleaned, preserved, not abandoned, just retired. She wandered the small kitchen, the hallway, the bedroom that used to be hers. She stopped at the spot where her crib had once stood, and remembered the lullabies Robert hummed to her when she couldn't sleep. Then she noticed the little lunchbox tucked on the top shelf. Inside was the last note Robert had ever written for her when she left for college. "You've already made me proud. Go make the world better. Love you always, Dad." She closed the lunchbox, her chest full of ache and joy, and carried it home to the place that bore his name. And so, the story came full circle. What had begun with a cry in the dark ended with light, not just for Lily, but for dozens, then hundreds of children who would pass through those doors and find not just shelter, but love. Robert's light wasn't just a center. It was a story, a promise, a beacon, all lit by one ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice on a rainy night long ago. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us love can change everything.